So the title of the talk, as you've seen it in the program, right, is Are You Insured Around Cybercrime? Or as I like to say, a little bit differently, Integration of Cyber Insurance into a Risk Management Program. Okay? So a lot of talks here tend to be very technical, right? This talk's going to be more thinking about risk and how to handle those sorts of things, okay? So a little bit about myself. Why should you actually pay attention? I've been a security guy my whole career. I was involved with some open source projects some time ago called OSVDB, Tracking Vulnerabilities, and another one called DataLossDB, where we tracked data breaches. Theory being trying to track how things are happening so we can better figure out the best way to work on security. From there, I got this wild idea to help an insurance company do this cyber insurance stuff. So a lot of people said that I went to the dark side. I was in security and things were good, and I was ruining my career going to work at an insurance company. But I basically have some experience on both sides, okay? So I'm not an insurance person here to sell you insurance. I just want to share with you a little bit, coming from a security person who's been involved behind the scenes on what's going on. I've briefed the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. about cyber insurance. Spent a ton of time speaking at conferences, traveling around, so I'm excited today to share some of this with you. This is the picture of how I look now. The one here before was sort of my insurance look, right? A little cleaner cut, you know, business guy look. So good stuff. All right. We're going to talk today about the state of security, okay? So, first of all, when we think about security, we try to think about it in terms of what's happening, right? There's a lot of statistics out there about things that are happening, but we've been looking at it in terms of actual data breaches that are occurring. Now, here on the left-hand side here, this is the frequency. So how often data breaches are occurring, right? This is when you want to think about what's the likelihood of a data breach, something bad like that to happen. Now, on the right-hand side, this is severity, typically measured by the number of records that go missing. Okay, that tends to be one of the biggest sort of points right now. Now, not all data breaches are equal, right? So when you look at them, you want to understand sort of what's happening. You can see there's been no slowdown whatsoever, right? In fact, we've tracked over 43,000 data breaches. Everyone's probably knows about a few, seen them on the news. Maybe, you know, some of your information has gone missing as part of a data breach or read about it. But the number of data breaches is just unbelievable. Now, we did some analysis of the year to date from the mid-year, just tracking what was happening. And what we saw was that there were over 3,800 unique data breaches that were reported, okay? Now, in many cases, there can actually be data breaches that no one ever finds out about, so that number is probably larger. But for the most part, that's a big number, right? And in this year already, just through half the year, 4.1 billion records were exposed. Billion records were exposed, right? I mean, that is just crazy. Now, when we compare that to the same mid-year from last year, what we're seeing is that things are on the rise, okay? So we're spending the most money we ever have on cybersecurity products and vendors and coming to conferences and learning and all this stuff about cybersecurity. But the number of reported data breaches is up 54%, and the number of exposed records is up 52%. It means we're getting worse, and we're on track for another worst year ever. Now, I will tell you, one of the sad things about my job is every year it seems to be we're getting worse. And I'm hoping if I come back here next year, I'm not saying, oh, it's another worst year ever. But right now, things are not getting better and they're getting worse. So, when you think about this, and I hate to say this, but do you start to believe that it's only a matter of time when a data breach or some sort of bad cybersecurity issue happens? Is it this sort of ticking time bomb that, it's not if, it's when, right? And if you believe that, and then we start to think about the fact that when you have a data breach or you have some sort of cyber situation, an incident, it's going to cost you money, right? Now, there are a lot of people that fight over how much a data breach costs, right? What are the costs per record and how much does it cost for forensics and to clean all those things up? All I want to get across is we basically we are seeing data breaches happening at an alarming rate, the worst that they ever have, right? We're seeing that no industry is able to avoid these things, and we know it costs some kind of money, right? So there's a good chance it's going to happen to you, and then it's going to cost you money. Okay, so with that said, it's not the greatest state of security, right? I don't want to paint a picture that says things are amazing. Things are not where they want to be right now. So let's talk a little bit about risk management and insurance. Now, whether you've been in the security industry for a very long time, or you're getting into this and you're brand new, everything that we're trying to do is around risk, right? We're trying to manage risk. That's what we're doing. And so when you think about what you can do with risk, there are 4 things, okay? Now, the first thing here is you want to avoid risks. If there's a risk and we can just straight avoid it, that would be great, right? So we'd like to do that. Now, if we can't avoid a risk, then what we want to do is we want to mitigate, right? We want to put some controls in place. And this is where a lot of cybersecurity people come into play with, solutions and technology and process and things of that nature. Yeah, there's a risk here. We can't avoid it, but let's do these things to lower the risk, right? Once you get to that sort of point, or if you can't implement some sort of a control, we do have the ability to accept a risk, right? And a lot of companies and organizations, unfortunately, maybe do this a bit too much. They're told about a risk, and then they say, who cares? We'll just do it anyways, right? And we don't want people just to sort of blindly say, who cares? But it makes sense if there's a business decision, right? If your business is about ready to do something and it's going to make you this much money and the risk is this small, well, then you do it, right? But if things are inverse, then you want to be smart about it. And you want to say, hang on a second, this may put the whole company at risk. Why don't we step back and look at this, okay? Seeing more and more companies that have exceptions or waiver processes in place where they have to submit to, the business, not just the IT person, and say, here's the risk. Are you okay with this? Now, the final thing you can do with risk is you can transfer risk. And I find it crazy because if you've been in the security industry for a while, these are concepts that we've talked about from the beginning. But no security person really likes to hear about transferring risk, right? It's just sort of not talked about. But it is a legit thing that you can do with risk. You can transfer risk. And how can you transfer? You can outsource, right? Maybe the risk is too much for you to handle it, so you're going to outsource it to someone else that can handle it better for you, right? That's an easy one. Contracts and agreements, this happens all the time, right? Can definitely transfer risk when it comes to a contractual standpoint. And then the final one, which we're going to spend talking about time, is insurance. This is the whole point of insurance, right? So why do people purchase insurance? So it happens for a number of reasons, without a doubt. And just a few of them, right? You want to reduce liability. You want to make sure that there's a loss, you can recover things. In many cases, it's a legal requirement. You don't have a choice. You have to have insurance, right? Can't get away from it. Sometimes you need insurance for securing loans or making your business image seem better, more stable, and all those things at times. And in some cases, it's just for peace of mind, right? Something bad happens, I just feel good that I've got insurance there, right? So whatever the reason may be, and whatever you're thinking about insuring, it's typically purchased for your most valuable assets. Things that matter, things that cost money, okay? We all agree? Yeah? Okay, good. Now, when you think about insurance coverage out there, we can insure people. We can insure events. We can insure yachts and boats. We insure our buildings, right? And there's insurance all over the place that we just go, yeah, of course, it makes total sense. I insure that, right? Healthcare. Believe it or not, there's all kinds of insurance you probably didn't even know existed. You can get travel insurance, right? So if you have a big trip planned and maybe you're going online and buying and all of a sudden now you see this new little thing that says, would you like to buy insurance in case things go wrong, right? They even have other event insurance. Maybe you're planning a big event, a conference, or maybe even yet a big wedding. And you want to make sure it's perfect. And if it rains and it's you can buy insurance for this stuff. There's all kinds of crazy insurance out there, right? Electronics. You go and buy the electronics, and on the way out, they say, hey, do you want the insurance protection plan with this? And you start to wonder, should I do that? I don't know, right? But there's tons of insurance out there. And there's even insurance that sometimes we're not even sure if we should do it. If you ever go and you're traveling and you rent a vehicle, and they say, do you want insurance for this thing? And you start to think, do I already have insurance? Do I not? Do I need? And there's even insurance they call umbrella insurance because we're not sure what kind of insurance you need, but we'll just cover things for you, right? All of this insurance that I've just shared, while some of it may seem a little wacky, this is all very commonly accepted stuff in the marketplace right now, right? But when we talk about cyber insurance, people lose their minds, right? But if you think about it, your most important asset, which we talked about, that's one of the reasons you get insurance, right? And we're talking about how breaches are occurring at a record pace, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing isn't working, right? So it's a little odd to me at points where we start to think, why wouldn't we get insurance, right? If you knew for a fact that your house or your business or something was going to have an issue, wouldn't you want to make sure you have insurance in place, right? So, why do people hate, or also known as, why haven't more people bought cyber insurance? Okay? First thing, they think they have unbreakable security. Does anyone think your organization has unbreakable security? I don't think anyone should be raising your hand, right? Do you remember the old Oracle bus? Did anyone ever see that, where they had a big bus on the side that said unbreakable? Do you think Oracle was unbreakable? No, right? Think the coverage won't last or won't respond. I hear this one a lot. A lot of people think that they may get this insurance, but when they need it, it won't be there for them. Sometimes people will say they don't think it's a good spend of budget. They think this insurance stuff is just so expensive it's not worth it. Sometimes I think they just have no clue about the market. They're not even really aware that it's an option. Maybe something else. But for the most part, as I've been talking with people, I think a lot of people just really don't understand it. They don't understand what we're talking about. Trust the salesman. Like I said, when I first started doing cyber insurance, all my friends thought I was a used car salesman and my career was over and it was the worst decision I ever made in my life. There's this sort of notion that insurance may be a little slimy, right? You pay the money and you're good on your part and you pay money, but when there's a need, right? This bad reputation of, denying claims, right? So if you even think in your personal life, what insurance that you may have you had a situation where you were just very frustrated that they weren't doing what you thought they should do, right? And then I'll also challenge people sometimes and say, well, have you had a situation where it turned out where it was there for you? And people tend to have a little bit of both. So in some ways, there's a little bit of concern just based on people's experience around insurance that's not the greatest. Now, in the cyber insurance world, right now the media is latching on to anything that's negative. If there's something good that happens, you don't hear about it. But there's a moment where an insurance carrier doesn't pay some sort of cyber issue. The articles come out like, see, I told you this stuff was a scam. You should never trust it, right? Now, in some cases, there are some very questionable things that are happening. For example, the non-petya ransomware stuff being considered an act of war and being an exclusion, and now they're saying they won't pay that one, which is a little questionable. The PF Chang loss, this one, in many ways, they didn't really have the proper insurance they should have, so it makes sense to me, but it sort of came across as it was a big problem, right? Another one that came out that says, what does this stuff really cover, right? A bank lost $2.4 million US, but the insurance people said, here's $50,000. Are you happy, right? That doesn't sound good, right? And then many, many others have come up, Sony, for example, and many others, where again, from my standpoint, what ends up happening is they don't have the proper cybersecurity stuff in place, and they think they're going to get it covered in another policy. Doesn't happen, and then it turns into all this sort of drama about it. But every time this stuff comes out, for people that inherently distrust insurance anyways, that's I told you so, this stuff's no good, right? Okay. Little education on insurance. Right now, there are many names for this stuff. There are many insurance carriers out there, okay? So lots of different things it could be called. Cyber liability is basically what it's been settled on. For those of you that hate the word cyber, I'm sorry. It's time to get over it. It's cyber insurance, right? But you'll hear it called data privacy, network security liability, all this stuff. It's all talking about the same thing. Now, one of the big concerns and problems right now is there's very little commonality. So when you think about other, maybe more immature insurance products, you're going to get relatively the same thing. That is not the case in the cyber insurance world, not at all. I plan to say this many times in this presentation. If there's one thing that you take out of it, that's not all policies are equal, that is the case. And hopefully I'll reinforce that as we go. Now, if you think about cyber insurance, maybe versus something you're used to in your own, personal insurance life, they're different products and they perform differently. So there's some common things, but not entirely. What I want you guys to understand is two major concepts. One is called first party, and one is called third party. So first party is quite simply, we pay to fix things we own when they're damaged, right? So if it's something that we have that has a problem and it's damaged, that's what's going to get paid, first party. Third party is when we pay others when our actions, or believe it or not, our inactions, we don't do what we should have, cause harm to other people. Okay? So these are just the two basic buckets of how insurance works, and you need to think about it. Now, in the cyber insurance world, if you think about these things, we can pay for the first party and third party as the result of some sort of security event, and it's a data breach. So if you start to think about it a little bit differently, just to get your head wrapped around it, first party, right? Cars crashed. Third party, tree falls on the car, right? So you start to think about how these things happen. Why does it matter? It matters because you want to get your head wrapped around what you may need to be covered, right? Because you can get a policy that covers both. Event cost, recovery, right? Getting you back up and running from a data breach, all of the things that are a part of that. But you can also protect yourself from lawsuits, resulting from a data compromise. In my view, it's really important to identify the types of incidents that may happen to you. What are the things that you're concerned about that you actually could think at your company that you need to have covered? Because when you sort of put it in buckets here, you can start to see forensics, right? If we think there's an issue, we got to pay some people to investigate what's happening. There's going to be lawyers, lots of lawyers. They're going to want money. They're going to want to help you through the process, right? Then we might have to actually mail things. We might have to provide credit monitoring. We have to say, sorry, we did that. Here's some free credit monitoring. Don't sue us, right? And then there's a bunch of liability things if you think about, right? Defense costs, settlements, regulatory fines and penalties, specifically in the U.S. and Europe are rising dramatically, right? You may have to reissue credit cards and things of that nature. There are all these costs that mount when there's an issue. Now, there are other first-party coverage as well. System restoration and extra expense. If there's an issue that happens and you're down and you need to get your website and your company back up, you can get coverage. Payment of extortion demands. Have we heard about ransomware? Right? Non-stop ransomware. An insurance company can help cover those costs and help you through the process, right? So there definitely is a lot of other things in here that you can consider what cyber insurance can help with. I know I said this a lot. Here's another slide. Not all cyber insurance policies are the same, right? So if you go out there and you look at all these different carriers and you say, I want some cyber insurance, it doesn't mean all these things I just listed will be covered. It can mean that, but you need to make sure that you look at the actual policy. Now, as helpful as I personally believe that a lot of these policies can be, some things are not going to be covered, and you just have to get your head wrapped around that, okay? Reputation damage. You can think about it in this way, it may be one of the bigger things, right? This issue happened and it hurt our brand. While insurance can be there to help you, like with PR and crisis handling and things of this nature, you're not going to be able to go to them and say, my brand was damaged by this much money, give me money, right? You can't get reputation damage for the most part. Regular maintenance, upgrades, fixes. They're not going to be there to do that, right? If you think about it, insurance is to get you back where you were. So if you're driving your normal car and you get in a wreck and it's totaled, insurance isn't going to come in and go, you know what? Forget that car. Here's a nice Ferrari. They're not going to do that for you, right? So you're not going to expect if you're running some really, really old systems, some old phone system, and there's a really nasty breach that happens or something that goes wrong, they're not going to come in and go, here's a nice new VoIP system for you. Hope you enjoy that, right? That's not the case. It took me a little time to get my head wrapped around this because the last thing that you want as an organization or an insurance carrier is to get you back where you were, which is super vulnerable, and then you get hacked again. We don't want that. Right? So, but do not expect them just to, take over maintenance and of all your stuff and give you the latest and greatest. That's not the case. Some other things. And economic value of data. If you say, hey, someone hacked in and stole my confidential business plan. right? And now that's hurting me, right? Those sorts of things, right? They're really tricky to get covered. And then sometimes, although we're starting to see this change, data or systems in care of someone else, right? So the way that insurance, does this evaluation, they're trying to understand your security. And if all of a sudden you just give all your data to someone else, right, you're covered, not necessarily your vendors. Now, you can get coverage for this, but in general, you just need to be mindful of that, okay? There are also what I'll call some not so common exclusions. These are things that if you see it, I'm really worried and you should run. Don't buy this kind of insurance with these things, okay? What ends up happening is when an insurance carrier is learning about this, they'll put in exclusions so they don't lose too much money as they're learning, okay? And so failure to encrypt data. This is a really, really bad exclusion. If you ever see this, for the love of God, please do not get this, okay? Do not get this. If you look at it, that basically means if it's not encrypted and you lose a mobile device or you lose something, they'll say, oh, sorry, can't help you. Can't help you at all. It's gone. We don't want to do that, okay? Failure to maintain or take reasonable steps to maintain security. They're basically going to come to you and say, if you don't do all the security things that you should do, right? No coverage. And you don't want that because anyone could make you look bad. You don't want to do that. Coverage limited to a website or internet activities only, that's a bad idea. Widespread viruses, malware, things like that. They try to put some of these exclusions in. Don't do that. Now, there's some other interesting things, like failure to comply with certain standards, PCI standards, the payment card industry, right? They'll say, if you weren't perfectly covering PCI, no coverage. Don't want that either, okay? Now, there are some ones that you need to be careful of that depends on your business. There's this one called contingent business interruption. That basically is saying if one of your vendors has an outage, say Amazon or Google or something like that, right, you can't get coverage. But if you're down and your whole data center is hosted there, you're going to say, well, my business is down, I should get coverage. So you have to be careful on some of these little things. The contingent business interruption one, the insurance carriers are worried about what we call systemic risk. Right? They're not so much worried about you've had a problem and they need to help you. They're worried about the grid goes down, the internet goes down, and then thousands and thousands of companies say, we're all down. Those are big losses, catastrophic losses that they're concerned about. So you may see something like that from time to time. Not all cyber insurance policies are the same. You actually need to read this paper. You need to read the policy. And if you don't want to be bothered with it, that's okay. You can hire someone to do it. There's a lot of insurance brokers out there that can read this for you and help you, okay? So, integration of cyber liability insurance. From my point of view in working with customers, executives understand risk. They understand that whole avoid, mitigate, accept, transfer stuff. They're already doing it, right? Most of your organizations and people you work with, they're already getting all this stuff we talked about. Property, casualty coverage for accidents, employment practice, EPLI, workers' comp for workers and all those sorts of things. Very normal. So most insurance executives and leaders at your organizations and companies know this stuff, okay? Now for me, I don't think there's this possibility of perfect security, right? We keep talking about it. But the reality is that there's some diminishing returns, right? So when you first start working on security, whether you think you have security in place or not, you start at a certain level, and the more that you do, you get better, right? But at some point in time, there's a curve where you can spend so much more money, and how much better at security are you really going to get? And with over 22,000 unique vulnerabilities in software reported alone, you could do everything right, but there'd still be a vulnerability in a piece of software that you're using that isn't going to help, right? So there's this point where you want to find optimal security, not necessarily perfect security. Okay, so if we think about estimating costs for a security program, and we're going to do this in US dollars for the sake of it, a small business, let's say that business is operating around 2 to 5 million US dollars a year, okay? How much money do you think they should spend on security? They need staff. Can't just have one person, they need a bunch of people, right? They need software and hardware. And by the way, all the vendors that you run into, you just can't buy a security software. You have to have antivirus and firewalls, and the list goes on and on and on of stuff that you need. And then even though you're doing it yourself and you're spending a whole bunch of money on vendors and tools, you now need to have external consultants come in and help you as well to verify, third-party verification, right? So if that adds up, that's a lot of money, right? So if we just say for the sake of argument that they're spending $200,000 US a year on security, is that enough? Should they be spending more? Right? That's a really low estimate, right? If you think about all the stuff we need. And so if they're spending that or spending more, does it really ensure that nothing bad's going to happen to them? Right? That's what you get your head wrapped around. Now, what's going on right now is cyber insurance is really cheap in my opinion. Okay? Very, very reasonably cost. And this, I'm not just talking about U.S. markets. It's the same in over here as well, and EMA and everything. You can get the coverage very reasonably priced. We see at times that minimum premium can be $1,000 US for $1 million in coverage. Not kidding, right? So the other interesting thing too that happens is that includes a lot of risk management services. So if you think about it, an insurance carrier doesn't want to take losses. They don't want to pay out $1 million. So what do they want to do? They want their companies to get better. So they're working with cybersecurity vendors and giving away security services for free. They have portals you can log into for free and get advice and call up and talk to people. They want you to be better at this sort of stuff. It's part of their offering, okay? Now, pricing does change based on controls, right? If you're in a low-risk sort of area, industry, less. If you're in a really, really high-risk market, they may charge you more, depending how much data you have. I will tell you from my standpoint, small companies have no clue about cybersecurity, right? So they're not doing anything. And in many cases, the insurance carrier helping them along is a really good thing. Now, larger organizations can also still get insurance, cyber insurance for a reasonable cost. If you think about a large hospital, $2 billion in revenues, if you want $1 million in coverage, it's probably $100,000 US. Maybe $5 million is probably about $200,000. What's really interesting is you can get a lot of insurance these days. You can build what they call these towers. Some insurance carriers will give you a policy by themselves up to $250 million. But if you think you need more, you want a larger tower, there'll be a lot of insurance carriers that come together and do this thing they call excess and build a tower. You can get a lot of insurance if that's what you want, okay? Now again, pricing can change based on controls. What I see at larger organizations, they don't want the risk management services from insurance carriers. They don't need the free portal and that sort of stuff. It's there, but they don't need to use it. Now we'll talk about a little bit later. There are some services that you can use still and get better pricing as a large organization, which I find very valuable. Not all insurance policies are the same. They're not all priced the same, okay? And it all depends on which carrier sometimes too, so you definitely need to investigate to see if it makes sense. And yes, shop around. If you shop around, you can get better pricing, okay? So in my view of the world, despite some limitations, which there are, there's real value in these cyber insurance policies. Now, I will tell you, even last night, this is a tweet from last night, right, say it with me, cyber insurance will not save you. Cyber insurance is not a replacement for good security, right? And in general, that's true. I'm not saying that the only thing you need to do is get cyber insurance. That's completely sending the wrong message. But the whole thread, if you receive a response, it's saying, oh, I'm sure they're never going to pay claims, and it looks great, but it's what could go wrong. I mean, people again are still very negative when you talk about this concept. That being said, cyber insurance is on a big uptake right now. We're seeing a whole bunch of companies that are coming around to understanding that it's to be part, not the only thing, but part of a program. And we're seeing a ton of interest with people trying to understand what's going on. Now, some of you have been giving me some dirty looks like you don't like insurance, and that's totally okay. I'm all right if you hate it. Other of you are nodding along like you sort of get what I'm talking about. That's fine. Whether you love it or hate it, I just want you to know a few things, okay? I believe firmly that if your organization doesn't have cyber insurance now, it won't be long before it has it, or some sort of bit of it, okay? responders, specifically you're in the incident response aspect, you need to understand some of the things about how cyber insurance works. First of all, help fill out the applications, help ensure proper coverage, right? Make sure that the people buying insurance, which tend to not be in the IT security world, they tend to be making these decisions. Maybe they're not getting the right policies with the stuff that you need covered. Know what cyber insurance will cover. Right? There are times where it's very clear in the policy you won't have coverage for something that you might need. So you need to recognize that or correct it. And then ensure that the requirements of a policy are met. Okay? If you think about cyber insurance, it's a contract. It says you're going to pay this, right? And if something goes wrong, we're going to cover these things, but you need to meet these obligations. And if you don't, then there's a risk that the insurance carrier will say, well, hey, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. We're not going to pay. Okay? So I tell a lot of incident responders, sometimes with cyber insurance, these aren't the IR processes that you know and that you're looking for, okay? Most companies have been focused on creating and defining incident management teams and sort of processes to respond, and that's great, okay? Some of you in the room, unfortunately, may have had to use it or test your incident responses. You thought you had a problem, maybe you did have a problem, okay? With cyber insurance, there are several things and several part of your processes that might have to change. Okay? And much is based on the type of policy or the carrier that you go with. The claims process is much like a normal insurance process you've gone through. When there's an issue, you got to tell the insurance provider about it. You got to tell them, okay? From there, you're going to get assigned a claims adjuster, someone that's going to help you with the process and the claim going forward. And based on the situation and what's happening, the claims process can take multiple different paths, okay? Almost all these policies have a timely reporting aspect where they say, you got to tell us about this in a certain amount of time, maybe within 30 days, within 60 days. Some of the policies have this as soon as practical thing. If a breach happens and you don't tell the insurance carrier about it, it can lead to problems. Definitely lead to problems. And in some cases, them just saying, no coverage. We're not going to give you any coverage. And I think from that aspect, you can think about this, right? If there's a problem and you don't tell the insurance carrier about it and you wait like 6 to 8 months and you're like, oh, by the way, we have this problem and like pay us all this money to help. It doesn't make sense, right? They want to know ahead of time so they can help you with the process. There are some concerns about over-reporting, right? If you think you have an issue and it turns out to not be an issue, if you tell the insurance carrier too much, are they going to say, oof, something bad's going on with them, right? And it's going to be a problem. I think if you believe you have a legitimate problem, you need to tell them as soon as possible. Cyber insurance policies typically cover costs in two ways. One is called pay on behalf. This is what's most common today. This means that the insurance carrier is going to make the payments directly to any vendor, anyone that they need help with, okay? What this does mean, though, you're going to have far less control over the process than you're used to. And in many cases, you won't be able to select the vendors that you want. They're going to have these vendors that they're going to pick. The other way is reimbursement. There's only a few policies left that are doing this these days. And it basically says, hey, you pick the vendors that you want to help with. You pay, negotiate, and then the insurance carrier will just, write you a check saying, here you go, here's for the cost. Panels. And I'm not talking about old station panels. I'm talking about they have these panels of vendors. And a lot of people get mad at this. One of the things that most people in the security world say is, I can't pick the vendor I want to work with. How dare them tell me who to work with? The reason they're doing this is they're trying to keep prices low. And so what the insurance carriers are doing, they're going out to cybersecurity vendors and saying, you guys are charging too much money. Your prices are crazy. What we'll do is we'll negotiate with you. I want prices lower. And then I will give you all of the business that comes in. So it's an incentive for the cyber insurance carriers, for them. They don't pay as much, right? But for the security vendors. And so they do this by creating these panels. And they will create panels for legal folks, forensics, notification, monitoring, all sorts of stuff. And in my view of the world, why initially it feels not so good that you just can't choose your vendor that you want to, it makes the insurance dollars stretch much further. And if you unfortunately go over, let's say you decide you're only going to get $1 million US in insurance, and all of a sudden the breach is really, really bad, you still get to use those vendors at that very discounted rate. I can tell you right now, If you've not experienced this, it's not a great feeling. You think you have a data breach, you call up a security vendor, and you say, hey, I think I have a problem. I need someone to come in right now. Do you think you're going to be able to negotiate a good price at that point in time? You're not going to be able to, right? It's going to be really expensive. Okay, so if you have vendors that you really like, that know your network, that know what you're up to, this may be a huge concern for you. You can ask the insurance carriers ahead of time, who are the vendors on your panel? And if you don't see anyone that you think's reasonable, then maybe they're not the right ones for you, okay? Risk management services. A lot of them have this concept of what they call a breach coach. So if you think something's going wrong or you have a question, there's a number you can call and you'll get a lawyer typically on the other side that'll say, hey, tell me what's going on. And they'll give you free counseling of what's happening, right? Are there regulatory things going on? Are there different country things you need to be aware of? Sometimes carriers use this as a way to triage claims. So they'll force you to go down that path, right? So you may have to go into a portal or you may have to call someone to say, talk to a breach coach before you can sort of file that claim. So it's really important that you know about those requirements. Make sure you know that process before, unfortunately, you may have to use it. Quick response. With the rise of cyber insurance, this is another concern, right? Incident responders tend to want to they see something and they want to jump in and start fixing. And that historically has been a good thing, and for the most part, I'll say it's still a good thing. That being said, there are some cases where with insurance, you need to notify the insurance company, and then together you may decide what the right thing to do is, okay? So you just need to be mindful of that. It's still generally, I think, the right approach to start responding, but as soon as possible, get the insurance carrier in the loop so they don't go, why the heck did you just go off and do all this sort of stuff when, we should have been doing this, okay? So cyber insurance in the UAE. A lot of people think cyber insurance is just a U.S. thing, right? And that's really not the case. While it still is the largest part of the market, we've been seeing a lot of cyber insurance growing in EMA, the availability growing. There hasn't been a ton of information coming out about sort of claims. A lot of claims information tends to be centered around the U.S., but there's more information coming out here recently. And I have to give credit to AIG. They recently put out a report. There's a link on there, and you'll be able to get the slides where you can read it in detail, where it covered what was going on and what they were seeing with their claims in the EMA regions. And what they basically said is that business email compromise actually has overtaken ransomware, which is a little surprising because ransomware was right up at the top of companies that were having issues with it. Really interesting to see how they laid out how they're responding to claims. Now, again, a lot of people think that these carriers are not paying claims. I can tell you, while there probably are some issues, they are paying claims. Okay? They're tracking what they're paying. They're starting to give us intelligence so we can see what's happening. The other thing is they're getting really good at handling these things, right? If you think in the room how many data breaches you've had to personally respond to in your experience, hopefully it's not many, but they're doing a ton. Some vendors are handling 2 to 4 to 5 of these things a day. Right? So they're getting really good at handling, but very interesting to see in the EMA region, business email compromise, ransomware 1 and 2, and then you can see the industries that they were experienced. Now, just a quick claims example that they published that I thought was worth sharing. There was they didn't share the name of the organization, which you can understand why, but they basically said one of their claims ongoing was a breach network at a Middle East-based global energy and logistic firm, a number of brute force attacks on their infrastructure, gained access to the network, they think through an email cloud host, although they're still not entirely sure exactly how it happened. And then in initial sweep, there were like 2,900 units that may have been compromised. So pretty substantial, right? Obviously, every breaching country has different restrictions. So due to the government restrictions, the data was not allowed to be moved with outside the company or the country, which is fine. So they worked with them to make sure that they did the investigation locally. What's really interesting is we're talking about 6 months later, and they still don't really know what's going on. They still haven't really figured everything out. They're still trying to figure out what's happening. Right now, costs are over $300,000 US and growing, right? So just an example that, this just to say that things are happening, and depending, I don't know how much they spent for the policy, right? If they spent $1,000 for the policy, that was a really good deal. But just very interesting that things are happening, and kudos to AIG for sharing some stuff. You can definitely read their report. All right. So actions. You need to continue to invest in security, right? I'm not up here telling you to buy insurance and that's it. In fact, there's a concept we call a moral hazard. And the moral hazard basically is if someone thinks they have insurance on their most important assets, then they don't really try to protect them. Because insurance will take care of it. That's a really bad thing. We don't want that to happen. The last thing we want people to do is to say, oh, I have cyber insurance. I don't care about security anymore. Not saying that at all. We need to continue to invest into security. Got to define a response plan, right? In case there's a data breach, you got to figure out how you're going to respond, how you're going to handle it ahead of time. You need to understand your exposure, data types, number of records. Start to figure out what you have and where it is, okay? Now, from a cyber insurance standpoint, determine if you actually have one, right? If you already have one in place, you need to know this, as we just talked about. You may not like the insurance concepts at all, but if you're on the IT or the security side and there's a policy in place, you need to know how to interact with this stuff. If not, I would challenge you and ask you to ask the right people at the organization of, should we have it? Right? See what kind of coverage we may need. Right? Try to get a quote. See how much this stuff will cost you. Find out if I'm right on the cost for your organization. Is it high? Is it low? Figure out what it would be for you. And if it's appropriate, right, then build it into your program as a part of your program, not the only thing. So from my view, to actually do security right, it's expensive. Nonstop, and it's expensive. A security program costs money. Yet we all believe that it's still most likely going to have a compromise, right? If you look at cyber insurance, it's cheaper, way cheaper than most controls and software things you're going to buy, right? So a lot of people that say, oh, it's so expensive. When you look at all the other security vendors and products and tools out there, they're a lot more money, right? So while there are gotchas, and we've covered a bunch of them just to make you aware, there's some legitimate policies and carriers out there. So if you're a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, or you're in charge of security, and then a breach happens, do you want to say to, your executives, whoops, sorry about that. We thought we did a good job. Is that what you want to do? Or do you want to say, we did everything that we could. We also actually have a partner and we have coverage. We're going to file a claim and we're going to work through this stuff, right? Now, incident response. There's still a clear need for organizations to do this response plan, right? Develop it ahead of time, all those sorts of things. But from my standpoint, no matter what size of the organization, the breach response partners have value, right? Whether you're small or you're large, you have a partner in this situation to help you through it. Like I said, they're handling so many claims right now. They have the vendors lined up. They know the game plan. They've been through it where they haven't done a good job and it's cost them a lot more money, and they'll help you through that aspect. So even if you just look at it as a partner to help you through and not as much on the financial side, I think it's fabulous. So some people will say to me, oh, man, if I was to get insurance, I'd have to have so much. It's way too expensive. Then just get a smaller amount so you still have the partner with you, okay? Now, on the small to medium business side, most people could care less about security. They just want to who you're going to call and get it done. So depending on the organization, or if you're working with other companies that don't have a lot of security to invest into, this is a perfect ideal situation for them, right? They can just call up and say, something's wrong, please just make this go away, and the insurance carrier is going to do the best to help with that. With that, I'm to the end. I do have 3 whole minutes if there's any questions, but I appreciate you listening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jack. Are there any questions in the room?
Someone has to have a question. No?
No, none. I think
yes,
then...
Please.
Oh.
What's the availability of insurers in the UAE?
Yeah, so it's not as much as in the...
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So the question was, what's the availability of cyber insurance in the UAE. The market in the United States is the largest by far. Usually I would say there's probably 100 carriers or so, but the last I heard it's like even more than that, 200 plus different carriers that are providing within the U.S. What's happening is there's a fair amount of carriers that have what we call a primary product. Well, they'll sell you everything. There's a lot more that do these little add-on things where they'll just, do an endorsement on something that you already have. I don't have the exact numbers for the UAE, but it's multiple. They basically have learned within the U.S., focused then on Europe, and now they're extending out. I know AIG's big over here. There's a bunch of others that continue to expand out. So the availability is starting to grow, but I would say finding someone within the organization, the broker, to say, hey, I'm looking for this, they can get you the exact answer. Right? Please.
One more call. And then what if let's say we decide to get on board with this idea, would they be sending a team to assess our current infrastructure and then 100-point checklist maybe that we cross off and stuff like that?
Great question. So the question is, all right, so if we get convinced that we need this stuff, right? What's sort of the process? How do they assess us, and how do we go from there? So that's called underwriting. Very much in the risk management world, you call vendor risk assessment, right? If you're in a security program and you say, hey, I want to do business with you, here's a questionnaire. That's typically the application process of how it starts. They'll say, okay, tell us about you. What's the name of your organization? How large? Revenues? How many people? So they're trying to understand how big the risk is, right? Are you small? Or are you massive, or somewhere in the middle? And then from there, the questionnaires sort of change. Depending on the carrier, it could be, believe it or not, 4 or 5 questions, which is shockingly not enough. And then there's others that are quite long. What we're seeing right now is the insurance carriers are fighting for market share. So they're not doing what I'll say a very good job of underwriting, right? Because if you think about it, if you think about most companies and the amount of claims that they're paying out, you would think, why in the world would they want to do this? There's a really high chance of a data breach. But you got to remember, they're doing this at scale, which is how they can handle claims and those sorts of stuff. But they will, you'll fill this out, and for the most part, that is all that needs to happen. Now, if you're a really large organization, or you're in a high-risk industry, or you want a lot of money, like we talked about those towers, they may get you on the phone and ask some questions about what's going on. But right now, the process is scarily easy. Scarily easy. What I think will happen over time is as claims continue to come in, and they start to do more losses, then they will start to have more stricter underwriting standards. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that whole moral hazard concept, where people can get insurance that don't deserve to get insurance, right? There has to be like this tall to ride the ride. You're doing the right things, and then as we talked about, insurance fills that gap. If that was the case, the insurance carriers wouldn't write a lot of policies right now because there's so many people that aren't doing what they need to do insurance-wise. So I think it will change over time, but right now it's really straightforward. All right, with that, I am out of time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me. I'll stick around if there's any other questions, okay? Thank you much.
Thank you very much, Jack.